Right now, the Israelis are continuing their slaughter of the Gazans. They bombed the Gazans. For a while, they were blockading food. People were starving. People are still very hungry. And what is the excuse that the Israeli nationalists give? Well, they always mention the 7th of October, when Hamas terrorists entered Israel and killed over 1,000 people. Now, what Hamas did was obviously evil. But here's the thing. The Israelis are using that evil to justify more evil.
הם רצחו אותנו, אנסו אותנו, שדדו אותנו, חטפו אותנו, רצחו ילדים קטנים, נשים, אנסו. אתה לא יכול להגיד דבר כזה אחרי מה שהם עשו. צריך למחוק את עזה.
ברקו.
למחוק את עזה.
עזה הייתה צריכה לקבל...
למחוק את עזה.
עזה הייתה צריכה לקבל מכה שלא כתובה בתורה.
אבל אתה אומר, אתה מבקר את זה.
את המכה הזאת ביקרת.
תשמע.
אתה מבקר את זה.
אתה יודע.
בוגי, טעית.
אני לא מקבל את זה.
מותר גם להגיד טעיתי.
אני חושב שצבא הגנה לישראל צריכה לתת להם מכה שלא כתובה בתורה.
אבל אתה אומר למה...
אבל בלי לפגוע. מה זה?
בלי לפגוע במי?
אין חפים מפשע בעזה?
אין, כולם מחבלים.
כולם.
רגע, לא, רגע.
על זה אני חלוק עליך.
אז אתה טועה.
יש שם נשים,
בוגי,
יש שם ילדים.
שהם חטפו לנו את הילדים, הם כולם חיכו להם סוכריות
אז אני לא מסכים איתך.
היו צריכים להרוג אותם במקום.
אני לא שולח חיילי צה"ל להרוג את כולם. אני בא להרוג כולם.
רגע,
חברים,
אתה יודע,
העם חלוק איתך
מר
בזה.
יעלון, אתה יודע שגם הממשלה הנוכחית לא שולחת את חיילי צה"ל ואומרת, תהרגו כל מי שבא ליד, או תהרגו ילדים ונשים, וזאת אמירה מאוד מאוד בעייתית להגיד את זה, וזה לוקח אותי גם לעובדה שהאמירה הזו שלך על אותו תיאור אתני לכאורה במרכאות כפולות ומכופלות, יצרה סערה גדולה בעולם. יש לך תפקיד מכוח התפקידים שהיית בעבר, צוטטת בכל כלי תקשורת בעולם, זה עשה נזק אמיתי.
מוריה, לשמחתי, מיד אחרי שאמרתי, הוציאו את הכוח הזה, ופתרתי פה בעיה להרבה מאוד אנשים, שכשהם הסתובבו בעולם, ישאלו אותם איפה הם היו.
בוגי, אבל למה הרחמים האלה? על מי אתה מרחם?
אני לא מסכים איתך, ברקו.
על מי אתה מרחם? זה כולם שם מחבלים בעזה. על מי אתה מרחם? הם שחטו אותנו פה ב7 באוקטובר.
אני מסכים איתך שצריכים לחטוף מכה כשלא כתובה בתורה.
מה זה מכה? צריכים למחוק את עזה.
טוב, אתה אומר ככה, אני לא מוכן. לא.
And it reminds me of the evils of Simeon and Levi in the book of Genesis. What happened in that book? What happened in that story? There is the sister of the sons of Jacob. Her name is Dena. And Dena went about, she wanted to hang out with the ladies and to do some party time, I don't know. But the Bible says that she wanted to hang out with the ladies of the city, so she goes out, and all of a sudden she gets approached by the prince of the land. He is the prince of Shechem. This is the region they were in. It was called Shechem. And these people who lived there, they were Canaanites. And so the prince of Shechem really is attracted to Dena, and he forces himself upon her, and he falls in love with her. Now, did the prince do wrong by raping her? Yes, obviously, that goes without saying. But what happened? The prince fell in love with Dena, and so he goes to his father, the king, and he says, "Father, I've fallen in love with this woman. I want you to talk to her father." So the father goes to Jacob, and he says, "Hey, Jacob, my son has fallen in love with your daughter, and I want them to be married." And so what does Jacob say? He says, well, if you're going to marry my daughter, then your son is going to have to convert to our religion, worship our God, and get circumcised. In fact, we would like for your entire city, your whole nation to be circumcised and to convert to our religion. And so the king says, okay. And so the king and the prince go to the people, and they say, every man should be circumcised. These people have accepted us as their friends and as their allies. They will become one with our people, we will become one with their people, they will marry our women, we'll marry their women, and we're all just going to be one big happy family. And this was God's plan of really joining together the Gentiles with Israel. Because this really shows that God's plan all along was to unite humanity, to graft all of humanity in with Israel. So the men of the city all agree to get circumcised. They get circumcised, and Simeon and Levi decide that they're going to do a genocide. They're going to do a massacre. And they know that all the men of the city are absolutely fatigued and helpless because they just got circumcised, so they're laying in bed. They can't fight at all. And Simeon and Levi they unsheathe their swords, and they go from house to house to house, killing all the men of the city. And they killed all the men of the city. And Jacob said to them, what the hell are you doing? We are a small nation, a small tribe, and now everyone's going to see us as treacherous and evil. And he was right. And Jacob is on his deathbed, And he looks at Simeon and Levi and he says, you, Simeon and Levi, are cruel, and your posterity, your descendants will be scattered. Your tribes will be scattered within Israel. It means your tribe is going to end. Now, what's interesting is that if you read the Palestinian Targum, it actually doesn't say Simeon and Levi will be scattered, but it actually says you, Levi, will be scattered. So actually, God was singling out the patriarch of the priest, and therefore he was singling out the tribe of the Levitical priesthood, which was the Levites, which came from the line of Levi. So there's a curse. There's a curse. Why was there a curse? Because Levi decided, I'm going to kill every single man in the land of Shechem. Yes, the prince of Shechem did evil, but what Levi did was he used that evil to justify another evil, which in this case was mass murder. And he could have said, these people are converting to our religion. They're going to be our people. Let's celebrate that. He could have done that. And God would have been happy, because God's plan from the beginning was for all of humanity to follow him. And so God said, okay, this is the opportunity for the beginning of the grafting in of the rest of humanity with Israel. But what does Levi do? He kills those people. He did wrong. Just as in Israel, they are using the evil that was done by Hamas to justify mass murder. It's the sin, it's the evil of Levi. And so what happened to Levi? His line, his family became the family of the priests. God said, okay, I'm going to choose that guy's people, that murderer, I'm going to choose his line, his family, to be the people of the priests. God has a sense of humor. But eventually that priesthood is going to be destroyed. So Jacob, from his deathbed, was prophesying the destruction of the Levitical priesthood. Very interesting. And what's interesting is that line in the book of Psalms, I think it's in Psalm 110, where it says, you are of the priesthood of Melchizedek. And St. Paul took that line in his letter to the Hebrews, and he takes that line and he says, you are of the priesthood of Melchizedek. This is the priesthood that Christ is a member of. And he says Christ is not a member of the Levitical priesthood. He's not a member of the priesthood of Levi, the mass murderer. He is a member of the priesthood of Melchizedek, because Melchizedek was a Canaanite. Christ, the Messiah, chose the priesthood of a Canaanite. And what race were the people of Shechem, the people that Levi mass murdered? They were Canaanites. They were Canaanites. So God chose the priesthood of a Canaanite to replace the priesthood of Levi. And so when Jacob said, your descendants will be scattered, Levi, because of your massacre of the Canaanites, he was prophesying the Levitical priesthood being replaced by a Canaanite priesthood. The very race that you went to war with, the very race that you slaughtered, a priesthood from that race is going to replace your descendants, Levi, and that priesthood will be the priesthood of the Messiah. You are of the priesthood of Melchizedek, as it says in Psalms, and as St. Paul says. And so it's very interesting. Like I said, God gives people time. He allows evil. He allowed that massacre to happen because he allows people to make the decision they're going to make. And he allowed that massacre to happen. And God gave them time. He gave the Levites centuries and centuries of time. They were the priests, they were on top of the world, and as Christ said, the Levitical priests were invited to the biggest parties. When people saw them, they would always make way for them. People always wanted them to come to their dinner parties. The Levites, the descendants of Levi, the mass murderer of the Canaanites of Shechem, were on top of the world. And so they're not even thinking. By the time of Christ, they weren't even thinking about what Jacob said on his deathbed. They weren't even thinking, hey, Jacob put a curse on our line, and he said we're gonna get scattered. Let's keep that in mind, guys. Let's try to be right with God here. They didn't give a damn. And so here comes Christ. So God gave the Levites all this time to think about this. He gave them all these centuries, just like he gave time to the Canaanites. He gave them all this time. And what did they do with it? They squandered it. They were obsessed with power. They became obsessed with going to the best dinners. And so after all this time of God's patience, here comes Christ. And Christ tells the Levites the parable of the vineyard, the master of the vineyard. And he says, there was a vineyard. There was a vineyard. And there was the master of the vineyard. And the master of the vineyard had these tenants. And the master of the vineyard one day sends one of his servants to the vineyard, and the tenants attacked the servant. So the master of the vineyard sends another servant, and they attack that servant. The tenants attack that servant. So he sends them another servant, and yet again that servant is attacked. So the master of the vineyard says, I will send my son. Surely they will not lay a hand upon my son. And they didn't even hurt his son. They murdered his son. And the wicked tenants take his son and they murder him. And Jesus says, and what will the master of the vineyard do to those wicked tenants? And the gospel tells us that the disciples of Christ said, Lord forbid, Lord forbid. Why would the disciples say that? Because they knew that Christ was foreshadowing the destruction of the priesthood. And the disciples were still very loyal to the priests. They were still connected to that system. And Christ says, the master of the vineyard will destroy the wicked tenants. In other words, Levites, that curse that Jacob put upon you when he was on his deathbed, that curse is nigh. It is here. It's gonna come. And the gospel says that the priests wanted to kill Christ because they knew that he was talking about them. It's very profound. God gave the Levites time. He gave them time to think about these things. To think about what? To think about the coming of the Messiah. To think the Messiah is going to come. We better know when the Messiah will come. We better be able to recognize the Messiah. And most of them were not able. Actually, I don't think any of the Levitical priests were able to actually recognize the Messiah, because they were so focused on their own power, and they squandered the time that God gave them to ponder on who the Messiah was going to be, and also to ponder on the fact that Jacob told them that they were going to be scattered. They didn't care. So they squandered their time, and they used their time to maintain their power. And here comes Christ, basically to tell them, hey, your time is up. That curse that Jacob declared on his deathbed to Levi for his mass murder of the Shechemites, that curse is coming. In other words, God watched the evil that Levi did. He watched. He allowed it to happen. He allowed those people to make their decision, and he gave their descendants time to think about that, to think about the impact, the weight, the gravity of that crime, and they didn't give a damn. God waits. God watches, but he waits. But the reality of justice always comes. And what happened? They were so bent on power. The Levites were so bent on power. Just as Simeon and Levi were so bent on keeping the inheritance within the family. Because what does Simeon and Levi say? They say, we can't allow these Shechemites to take our inheritance. We can't allow these Shechemites to share our inheritance. So they were bent on keeping their possessions and not sharing it with others. And so the Levites in the time of Christ, they were so bent on what? They were bent on keeping their power, and they knew Christ was a threat to their power. Here comes Christ, a priest of the order of a Canaanite. A priest of the order of Melchizedek, a Canaanite, the very race that your patriarch Levi butchered. Here he is to replace the priesthood of Levi. It's very profound. I can talk for hours about this topic. It's very profound. And what happened? They killed Christ, just as they killed the Shechemites. And they thought, okay, we killed them. The threat is over. We got rid of them. And then 40 years later, the Levites do a revolution against the Romans. And the Levites, well, they didn't like foreigners very much. And the Levites, specifically the governor of the temple, who was a Levite, I think his name was Hananiah. And he said, no foreigner will be allowed to have a sacrifice in the temple. No foreigner will be allowed to enter the temple. And so we will not do any sacrifices on behalf of foreigners, and that would include the Caesar. Well, the Caesar got wind of that, and he said, that's a declaration of war. You're done. And so there was a war. So the hatred of the foreigner led to the war between the Judeans and the Romans, just as the hatred of the foreigner led to Levi killing the Shechemites. And it led to Levi getting a curse on his posterity. And so that hatred against the foreigner continued on. And the Levites said, no foreigners will be allowed to have sacrifices done for them in the temple, including the Caesar. And a declaration of war was upon the Levites, upon Judea, and the temple was destroyed. So the hatred of the foreigner led to the curse that was declared on Levi, and the hatred against the foreigner led to the destruction of Levi and the fulfillment of the curse that Jacob declared on his deathbed, because he told Levi, your descendants will be done. You're going to end. And what happened? The temple was destroyed, and thus the Levitical priesthood was destroyed with it. And Josephus tells us that some of the Levitical priests rushed to the Caesar and they begged for their lives, and Caesar said, your temple is now destroyed. Of what good is your priesthood? And he had all those priests executed. That was the fulfillment of the curse of Jacob, the fulfillment that Jacob declared from his deathbed. The hatred of the foreigner led to the curse, and the hatred of the foreigner led to the fulfillment of the curse. God allows evil, but he waits, and justice is realized inevitably. And what does God say? He says, justice is my metric. And what does Jesus tell the high priests? You reject the spirit of the law, but you follow the letter of the law. And what is the spirit of the law? Justice and mercy. And justice is realized. And if mercy is rejected, justice will be realized. The Armenian genocide, well, it was basically the Ottomans saying, we're going to exterminate all the Armenians. And the Grigoris Balakian, he gets into some of the reasons as to, he gets into some of the reasons that the Ottomans would point to when they were justifying their policy of extermination. So what were the pretexts? One of the pretexts, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, well, we have to understand, one thing we have to understand about genocide is that all genocides are done under pretext, meaning all genocides are done under some kind of a justification that to too many people seems legitimate enough to rationalize a genocide. And you would be actually, and like I've said, the world is scary, it's full of evil people, and we're living in the devil's playground. There are enough people out there who would accept the arguments for genocide that are presented when the genociders are presenting their arguments to justify their policy of mass extermination. The Nazis said, well, the Jews are pushing communism, and communism is a threat to the world, or it's a threat to Europe, so we have to kill the Jews. And they would point to the fact that there were Jews who were indeed communists, and they would say, you see, this is evidence enough, we have to exterminate them. Now, the Ottomans were dealing with Armenian terrorism, and Grigoris Balakian does touch on this subject. And the Turkish nationalists today will actually tell you about this, that there were indeed Armenian terrorists. And the Grigoris Balakian talks about how there was a Turkish official who went out of his way to make sure that Armenians were butchered. He doesn't give the name of this Turkish official, but he went out of his way to order that the Armenians who were under his reign were getting butchered. And Balakian is with this Turkish officer, and he speaks to this officer and he says, why is the governor so bent on exterminating us? And the officer says, well, it's because Armenian terrorist killed his entire family. And so now he wants to exterminate the Armenians. Well, as I was reading that, I could not help but be reminded of Gaza. And this is how the devil always works, I must say. This is how the devil always works. He points to one evil to justify another. Let's see. One of David's sons raped his sister, David's daughter. And another one of David's sons, Mr. Absalom, says, "You see, my father has not punished my stepbrother, and my stepbrother is a rapist, and he raped my sister, and I am going to go against my father." Now, did David do wrong when he did not punish his son for raping his own sister? Yes, David did wrong. But Absalom comes along and he says, "My father has not enacted justice on my corrupt brother who's a rapist. I'm going to go against my father." Now, Absalom pointed to an evil to justify another evil, because he really didn't give a damn about his sister getting raped. He cared about getting power and overthrowing his dad and taking power. That was what his motivation was. So the devil and his acolytes, they point to an evil to justify another evil. The devil is called the accuser. He is not called the accuser for no reason. The reason why he's called the accuser is because he accuses. He says, "Oh no, look at what these people are doing. Look at the sins that these people are doing." The devil goes to God and he says, "God, I bet I can get Job to reject you." And he wants Job to sin. He wants Job to reject God so that he could go to God and say, "You see what this guy did? He rejected you. You see, I am right to punish him. I am right to destroy his family and to cover his skin with boils. I'm right to have marauders raid his land and kill his servants and rob his property. I'm right, you see?" Because that's what the devil did. He said, "I bet I can get Job. I bet Job really doesn't love you. And I'm gonna punish him. I'm gonna kill his family. I'm gonna have his servants killed. I'm gonna have his property robbed." And the devil did this with the hopes of getting Job to reject God so that he could go, "You see, I was right. He deserved what he was getting." And the devil even influenced Job's friends to go to Job as he was in his suffering to tell him, "Job, you deserve what you're getting because obviously you have offended God." This is what the devil does. And this is demonstrated in the Bible. The devil says, "These people have done wrong, so therefore this other evil is now justified. Doing this evil is now justified because they deserve that evil." So yes, Hamas did an evil. Yes. But does that mean that you kill every single Gazan? Well, in the minds of a lot of Israeli nationalists, in the minds of too many Israeli nationalists, yes. Every single Gazan deserves to die. And what the Israelis love to say, I shouldn't say the Israelis because I don't want to generalize people, but what the Israeli nationalists love to say is that there are no innocents in Gaza. They're all terrorists, even the children. They're all terrorists, from grandmothers to toddlers to everyone. They're all terrorists. And that's why the Israeli nationalists who are in the IDF don't mind doing war crimes, such as, getting an elderly man, tying a wire around his neck and forcing him to become a human dog sniffer and making him go from house to house to house to look for bombs, and so that if he finds a bomb, the bomb will blow up and kill the old man. And that's what they did. And they actually made that into official policy. I mean, it's not really written anywhere, but they effectively made it into official policy because there have been many numerous cases of this happening. And you can't say, well, this is just soldiers going rogue, because we actually know for a fact that there was a senior officer who did a presentation in which he told his subordinate officers to use a mosquito. Well, what does he mean by mosquito? He means a Palestinian civilian. Use a mosquito to do this sort of thing. They call them mosquitoes. So there's dehumanization, which is a prerequisite to any sort of genocide. The point being that there is a spirit that says, because some members of this group did wrong, therefore I have a right to kill all those members. This is what the Ottomans did. There were indeed Armenian terrorists who did wrong, absolutely. But the Ottomans took that wrong to justify extermination, to justify genocide. I remember seeing this video of these old Israeli guys that were talking about the war crimes that they had committed in one of the earlier conflicts between, one of the older conflicts between the Jewish Israelis and the Arabs. And of course, the Arabs lost. The Arabs always lost in wars when they fought the Israelis. They're not really that good in warfare. But these old Israelis are talking about the war crimes that they committed.
מתי הרגנו בהם, בלי נקיפת מצפון. הרגת, אז עשית דבר טוב. הייתי מוכן להרוג. אני אספר לה שאני הייתי רוצח. עד היום לא כשאתה אקדח, אתה הרג את כולם. יאללה, לקחו אותם חרות, בזמן קרב, אם מישהו הרים ידיים, משהו כזה. לא לקחתי שבויים. כמה אתה חושב אנשים הרגת ככה? לא ספרתי. אני לא יכול לדעת בחיי.
הוא תפס אישה, חתיכה צעירה, נכנס לבית אחד, הכין חדר מיטות, עם מיטה, פרטה לזיין אותה.
הילדה חזרה, סמרטוטיה.
אחד אנס שם איזה ילדה בת 16, משהו כזה. אתה מבין? אבל זה מכוער מאוד, היה לנו בחור אחד, הוא נפטר, הוא היה פרא אדם, הוא לקח פשוט מאוד ורצח אותם בתוך המכלאות. חוטי ברזל כאלה, עגולים כאלה, אספו כל הגברים. הם יושבים שם כולם על הרצפה, ובא מישהו ולוקח תת מקלע ומתחיל זה, מחליף מחסנית, שלקחו את הלוויורים ורדפו אחרי חבר'ה ושרפו אותם. זה היה משהו זוועתי, וזה אסור לספר, אני לא אדבר על זה. מלחמה זה מלחמה.
And they're boasting about it. They're not saying, hey, I did wrong and I'm ashamed of what I did. They're boasting about it. And they're saying, there was one guy who said, oh, you know, I found an Arab girl who was good looking and I raped her. This is what he says. And he's laughing about it. And one guy is saying, well, you know, I think he said I got a flamethrower and I was just burning people alive. And it was fun. I mean, they're boasting about it. And these are really old guys. They're probably in their 80s, at least in their 80s. Maybe their early 90s even. I mean, they're really old. We'll just put it that way. And I'm thinking to myself, you're meaning to tell me that you did these crimes and you had all these decades to think about it, to have some introspection, to reflect on it, and to come to the conclusion and to have the awareness that you did something wrong. And you're in your 80s, you're in your elderly age, you're about to die at any moment, and you're proud of it? You see, but God allows these people to be proud of it, and he gives them time. I mean, these guys are really old. God has given them plenty of time to think about what they did and to realize that what they did was wrong and to repent, but they don't. But God waits. He allows people to do evil. He allows people to live long enough to ruminate over what they did or to think about what they did and to at least try to come to the awareness that what they did was wrong. He allows them. It's like when God goes to Abraham and he says, listen, Abraham, your descendants, they're going to be slaves in Egypt. And they're going to be slaves for about 400 years. And then they're going to come back here to the Holy Land. And I'm not going to have your people conquer the Canaanites anytime soon because, and this is what he tells Abraham, because the evil of the Canaanites is not yet full. The cup is not yet full. In other words, the Canaanites are evil, but I'm going to give them 4 centuries. I'm going to give them 400 years to finally do what is right. I'm going to give them that time. I'm going to give them that space. And so for 400 years, he gave them time. And you could say, well, how would the Canaanites have been able to know what they were doing was right or wrong? God gave them Melchizedek. The king of Jerusalem in the time of Abraham was Melchizedek. He was a Canaanite king, and at that time, Jerusalem was not a Jewish city. It was a Canaanite city. And so he gave the Canaanites time. He gave them Melchizedek, the founder of the very priestly order that Christ is a member of. Christ is of the order of Melchizedek, not Levi. And he gave them all the time. He gave them all the truth. He gave them all the information in the world as to why what they were doing was wrong, and they didn't give a damn. And so the Hebrews come along, and some of them repent, right? The Canaanites of Gibeon, they repent. There was that Canaanite harlot and her family, they repented. They said, oh, we're with God, don't kill us, and the Hebrews spared them. But God gave those people 400 years to think about what they were doing, and they didn't give a damn. Just like those old Israelis who did war crimes, he gave them decades to realize that what they did was wrong, and they don't give a damn. They're laughing about it. And there's many examples of this that I can think of. You can watch a video of old Japanese war veterans from World War II talking about how they massacred Chinese people. And in at least one of the interviews, you can see a Japanese veteran smiling and laughing about it. It's pretty disturbing.
手つないで、2人ずつつないで、4列応対の10体だな、10体にして、様子懇願さ持ってったんだ。
맞짱 리포티 으스 신나요 맞짱 하티 맞짱 호도가 으스다 티시밭
그래서夜暗い時後ろから11巻銃で撃ったんだ。
あそこに戦時があるんでね、そして桟橋に並べてね、そして機関銃でダダダダーと戦場でやったんですよ。
とにかく2000や3000人処分するんだろうが簡単だから、時間的にもおそらく30分ともかかんなかったんでねえかな、あれ。とにかくカモを防いだわけだ。つまりなんていうかな、こういう普通に弾が通るように銃弾を作ったわけなんです。
あと銃器でぶっていじるのも多いから、それは銃でついだんだ。銃さ、金つけたやつ、銃金っつうんだ。2万の引いてをやっつけちゃったんだ。
鼻によってしそうな声出すからね。
Now, there is a video that I found of an old Japanese guy admitting that what he did was wrong. And he was a member of Unit 731. This was a unit whose job it was to actually just do human experiments on civilians. So they did human experiments on Chinese people, on POWs, and other victims of the Japanese reign of terror. And this old Japanese guy, he's saying, I did evil. I did wrong. And he goes to China and he talks to a crowd of Chinese people and he said, I did wrong and I ask for your forgiveness.
それはです。1939年5月のハルピンに行きました。この細かい条文がいろいろ申し渡されたんですが、今でもはっきり覚えているのは、この舞台では見るな、聞くな、言うな、これが鉄則だろうと。
Thousands of prisoners were deliberately infected with disease. The doctors took careful notes. This was, after all, a scientific exercise. After the victims became sick, they were cut open while still alive. The doctors wanted to chart the course of the infection. Shinazuka is still haunted by his first vivisection.
解剖台があって、解剖台はです。タイルが貼ってありました。そこにです。特別班の範囲によって実験中の人、瀕死の状態の人が運び込まれて。
The victim was not given any painkillers in case it affected the germs. Shinazuka, who had no medical training, prepared the body.
最初のところは足が震えてて自分自身が何をやってたのかはっきりした自覚も持ってませんでした。目をつぶるようにしてやったことを覚えてます。 まず最初に水でデッキブラシを使って体を洗ったということは隠しています。
The leaders of Unit 731 tried to cover up what was happening here. They told the locals this was a disease prevention and water purification plant, when of course it was nothing of the sort. The prisoners themselves were called logs, a reference to their subhuman nature and to the timber yard next door, where the logs were chopped up.
お前のところは何本倒したと。俺のところは2本だと。俺のところはまだだよと。
Now, for the first time, a member of Unit 731 has returned to the scene of the suffering. This time, though, Yoshio Shinozuka is armed only with an apology.
皆さん方の顔を見る中で本当に悪いことをしたという思いがいっぱいになります。このような私もです。このような極悪なことを平気でやってきた人間であります。この場で頭を下げてお詫びして済むことではありません。
It's the first time these people have heard a Japanese apology, and it means a lot.
Now, this is a very old man. So he used his time right. God gave him that time. You got all these decades to realize that what you did was wrong. And he came to that realization. But there is another video that you can see. Actually, it's in the same video. There is another Japanese man that you can look at who was also a member of Unit 731. He's also very old. And he says, not only am I proud of what I did, doing human experiments on people, he said, if I could do it all over again, I would. This is a very old man. Hell, he's probably dead by now.
Other members of 731 consider Shinozuka a traitor, brainwashed by the Chinese authorities. They still maintain their unit was a force for good and have no sympathy for the prisoners who were vivisected.
これは相手の国の人が言うとることで、日本の国の側から見ますとね、死刑囚ですからね。特にうちの部隊に与えられたのは死刑の執行人ですわな。
Toshimi Mizubuchi used to teach 731's recruits. He now leads a comfortable life in Kobe and organises the unit's annual reunion. When the war was lost, Mizubuchi was given the job of destroying the evidence, including leftover prisoners.
これはマルタ収容施設は密閉した部屋になってますんで、普通の場合はパイプから空気を送ってるんですね。それを今のメタンガスにそういうふうに切り替えたようですね。はい。それでいわゆる窒息死させたわけですね。これはうちの部隊の。
As many as 12,000 human guinea pigs died at Harbin, but from this member of Unit 731, there's no apology and no remorse.
僕は誇りに思ってますね。若ければね、部隊は面白い部隊だったと思いますから、やってみてもいいなと思いますね。
He doesn't give a damn. He had all the time, and he doesn't care. He doesn't come to the realization that what he did was wrong. But God waits. God waits. It's like the two thieves that Christ was in between when he was being crucified. They both were given some time. I mean, it was not that long. But even with the short amount of time that the penitent thief had before he was going to die on that cross, he said, I did wrong. So even God gave those people time. God even gave those thieves some time. They had some moments to have some sort of introspection. And one thief said, I did wrong. And the other thief said, if you're really the Son of God, then get me out of this cross because I have no accountability. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.